purpose of this video is to sort through the tangled web of misinformation and rumors circulating regarding the questions of corruption and Harry Reid's involvement, or lack thereof, in the Bundy Ranch showdown. We'll also address a very serious error that made it into our previous video on the topic, and by the time we get to the end, you'll fully understand why we took that video down. Alright, so there was this article that claimed that the siege on Bundy Ranch was really about fracking leases. For evidence, it referred to this article on shalereporter.com, which actually referred to land sold in eastern Nevada. Clark County isn't in eastern Nevada, so it's clearly not the same land. At this point, the author has to be aware of the mistake. But because he hasn't taken it down or issued a retraction, people are still sending me this. Then, of course, we had some unsubstantiated rumors claiming that, quote, there are developers working for military contractors that want that land and water for mining weapons-grade minerals for industry. They want to sell the land by the highway for real estate development because it's close to I-15. Again, this claim isn't even coherent. Military contractors like Blackwater don't buy land and mine minerals for weapons. These are three separate industries. Now for the troublesome story. That the showdown in Nevada was really about an underhanded business deal involving Senator Harry Reid, his son, the BLM, and a $5 billion solar energy plant. The first source that we refer to is from Reuters, August 21st, 2012, which does indeed go into the details of a shady business deal involving ENN Energy that Harry worked to push through for his son. Just one problem, the entire project fell through in 2013. This was just an obscure press release on a local news outlet at the time, but now it's kind of important. Any narrative that relies on the ENN connection is broken. However, there are still several issues here that remain, and there are alternate theories already springing up, so let's look at the rest of the story and see if there's still a case. We have this webpage that was taken down from the BLM website, which someone quickly deleted from Google's cache. This webpage mentions the Dry Lake Solar Energy Zone's mitigation strategy as one of the justifications for seizing Cliven Bundy's cattle. You also have the fact that the current head of the BLM, Neil Corntz, is Harry Reid's former advisor, and as the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid directly participated in his confirmation. And to make things even more interesting, we have the fact that it was revealed this past week that the FBI had been attempting to investigate Harry Reid on unrelated corruption charges, but they were blocked by the Department of Justice. We also know from this article from the LA Times that Harry Reid has a long history of finding creative ways to funnel money towards his family members. And we have the well-documented case of his attempt to push the ENN project through for his son, Roy Reid, via Reuters. And even if that project fell through, it still demonstrates how ethically flexible he can be. So the question here really isn't whether Harry Reid is corrupt. The question is whether he had a hand in the Bundy Ranch debacle. Now, like I said, there's some people who've already formulated an alternate explanation tying Reid to the BLM's move against the Bundys. They claim that the standoff is indeed about solar energy crony capitalism, just not ENN. That narrative revolves around a company called First Solar. First Solar is running quite a few solar energy projects in Nevada, one of which is planned for the Dry Lake Solar Energy Zone. The company has apparently been heavily subsidized by the Department of Energy, and there's been quite a bit of scandal regarding how that money has been handled. Particularly, there was a scandal where the CEO sold off $450 million of the company's stock, even though the company was floundering miserably. And then there's the fact that one of its top executives, James Hughes, aka Jim Hughes, just happens to be one of the unindicted co-conspirators in the Enron case. Based on all this, First Solar seems to be a very questionable company. But how all of this is supposed to connect Harry Reid to the Bundy case is very, very blurry. Now, there is a connection to Neil Corntz. On March 6th, the environmental advocacy group Defenders of Wildlife filed a lawsuit against Neil Corntz, head of the Bureau of Land Management, for his role in pushing through two major solar projects that they say is going to devastate the tortoise habitat. According to an assessment released by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2013, the two projects, which are owned by First Solar, are expected to displace, injure, or kill up to 2,115 threatened desert tortoises. So while the BLM is attempting to claim environmental concerns to push the Bundys off the land, they've fast-tracked projects that literally raze the desert completely to the ground, destroying all wildlife. Now, that information is interesting and it does discredit the official motives, but it doesn't prove that Neil Corntz made the decision due to a conflict of interest, and it doesn't prove that Harry Reid was involved. If we had strong evidence connecting Harry Reid to First Solar, then we might have a case. But no one has posted any hard evidence tying Reid to First Solar financially as far as I know, and I've looked really deeply, I followed every rabbit hole I could find. There are some who've pointed to a small campaign donation that one of the executives of First Solar made to Harry Reid some years back. That claim wasn't very well sourced, and even if it had been, we're talking about a few $1,000s here, and it's hard to believe that that would be enough to make Harry Reid pit the BLM on the Bundys years later. Others have posted this article showing Reid in a groundbreaking ceremony for the Moab Paiute Solar Project, but that really doesn't mean anything. Participating in a groundbreaking ceremony for a project like that is normal for a senator. Now, it may very well be that if we look at Reid's financial statements, investments, and the investments of his family members, we might find something. Unfortunately, the public no longer has access to that information online. We don't have access to that information because of a law which Harry Reid himself introduced. The bill S-716, which was passed on April 13, 2013, modified the Stock Act, repealing the requirement for Congress and executive branch employees to post their financial disclosures online where they could be read by the public. It may be a total coincidence, but it's interesting to note that Harry Reid passed this law after the scandal regarding his son's stake in the ENN project, and right before the ENN officially backed out. I'm sure we would have learned all sorts of interesting things if the FBI corruption probe into Harry Reid's dealings hadn't been blocked by the Department of Justice. But it's important to be clear here, though, that it may be that if they investigate him, they would turn up all sorts of dirty laundry, but nothing that relates to this situation. We can't know that. We might have our suspicions, but our suspicions aren't evidence. So was Harry Reid behind the Bundy Ranch crackdown? I don't know. And I'm not going to pretend that I know unless I see some solid evidence one way or the other. If you have evidence, you're welcome to send it to us at our Facebook page or on Twitter, and we'll look at it. Now, some people were angry with me for taking down the last video. Some claimed that I was cowering to these guys, that I was being threatened by someone or intimidated. Listen, I know that makes better television, and it's less humbling than having to admit a mistake, but it's just not true. No one sent me any threats on this particular issue, as far as I know. And even if they had, I don't bow to those kinds of tactics. I do, however, bow to reality. No one ever wins a fight against reality. You might think that you win, but you actually just become delusional. So if someone sends me evidence that destroys one of my arguments, then I must change my stance. Period. I don't view that as optional, especially if you're dealing with information that's being spread to the public. Because if you don't correct yourself, there's a lot of people who are going to assume that the false information is correct. And that's what the mainstream media does. They get things dead wrong all the time, and then they rarely correct themselves. In fact, more often than not, they build on their faulty information and keep referring back to it as fact. A good example of this is the sarin gas attacks in Syria. We have the UN investigator Carla Del Ponte, who went public saying that the evidence they found indicated that it was the rebels behind the attacks and that there was no evidence whatsoever that the Syrian government was involved. And yet you'll still see Western politicians and the mainstream media referring back to that attack as a justification for measures against Assad. Unfortunately, the alternative media has a really bad habit of doing the exact same thing. For example, this article, which originally went viral covering the Reid connection, hasn't been taken down or corrected even though the authors are fully aware that the ENN project has been shelved. We know that they know that the project has been shelved because they mentioned it in another article. The article claiming that this is all about fracking leases is still up as well and hasn't been updated. People are still linking to these articles as evidence. People are still sending this stuff to their friends. That's really bad. If we get something wrong, we have to take it down, otherwise we're spreading disinformation. And we can't just take it down and pretend like nothing happened. Because if you do, there's going to be people who didn't notice that you took it down, and they're going to continue to spread the wrong story. Listen, we can't compete with the big corporations in terms of budget and equipment. All we have going for us, really, is our commitment to telling the truth. If we lose that, then we have nothing.